Welcome again to Locked On Seminoles. Going to do a little crossover action today with Brandon Olsen from Locked On Gators. A lot to discuss considering not one, but both of the Seminoles and the Noles have lost their quarterback headed into this week's annual Florida State versus Florida rivalry. Brandon, thank you very much for coming on the show. If you want an opening statement about that, I've watched this rivalry my whole life, and I'm trying to think, has there ever been a time when both quarterbacks have been out? If there is, I'm missing it. But off the top of my head, I can't think of it. The floor is yours, brother. What do you want to say about Florida State and Florida with backups?
It's just gonna be so ugly. I'm just watching that. First, I will say this: I hate both of the injuries. Obviously, I'm going to hate the Florida one, like the Jordan Travis one. Just it sucks as well. And I get I think that's one of the things where Florida Gators fans get mad at me for is that for years now I've been like, oh, like Jordan Travis is just like a couple of steps away from being a really good quarterback. And so it looked like he finally like put it together this year and just untimely injury. It's just I know it's just going to be a very ugly game at that point. Like backup quarterbacks, you're not going to see a very fun offense there from either side. It's going to be one of the uglier games we've seen in this rivalry, and we've seen a lot of ugly games.
Well said. I believe, what was it we said the rivalry total was? Like Gators lead, what is it, 37-27, something like that? All time?
37-27-2, yeah.
And the rivalry has had some wild swings in it. The 90s were the best because both teams were top five for much of that decade. But obviously, you had the Urban Meyer years, you had the Jimbo Fisher years. Teams just kind of flip-flopped. One coach would leave, and then the other team would get a really good one. But now we're in a situation where Florida State seemed to be on the cusp. They're about to do that again. You lose it. My first thought here on Jordan Travis, when he first went out and I see Tate in the game, I'm like, they're down 13-3 or whatever it is. This may not go well. And then they just went nuts. Tate's got a pretty good arm. I was impressed with his poise, but he still isn't Jordan Travis, and obviously the running ability is part of it. I'm curious to see what Florida does because their offense or their defense has been an atrocity to mankind for – well, I'll let you speak to that in a moment, but it's been bad. Do I think that they're going to go into the swamp, though, and just throw it down and drop 38 on the Gators? Probably not. How do they beat them? I don't know. I need to go back through and watch some of his throws again, but I was happy. What would you say about the situation with Mertz not being in and with what's coming next? Any thoughts about the backup for the Gators?
Yeah, I think first off, we have to start with raise your hand if you have been personally victimized by the Florida Gators defense, because that is me. That is not just an atrocity to mankind. It is a personal attack every time I have to go watch them play. But I will say with Max Browne, he's someone who, before Florida, he was a Central Michigan commit. He was a Jim McElwain commit. And then he flipped and Billy Napier came over from Louisiana. And Max Browne was someone that I was a fan of. I said, I think he's got the physical tools to work out. Needs a lot of work. And Billy Napier, even when he joined the class, Billy Napier was like, yeah, he has a lot of work that he needs to get done there. But it was something where he has physical tools. He's not ready to be a starting quarterback at all, but hey, now you have to be. I think that what we saw when Max Browne came in, I loved first play for Max. He came in, he threw the ball to the sticks. Like it wasn't just a screen. It wasn't just a run. It wasn't conservative there. Threw it to the sticks immediately. Good throw. He had a couple of throws where I was like, okay, I'm not saying he's better than Graham at all. But he attempted passes Graham Mertz wouldn't attempt. Like he just threw the pass where it's like, my receiver's winning this, or he's not, but I'm going to find out anyway. And Khalil Jackson came down with a circus catch, and it was just one of those aggressive mindsets that we see. It's just very starkly different. And the mobility was huge. That helped open up the run game. We saw a little bit of option game. We saw some RPO. It looked kind of like the Florida offense when Anthony Richardson was there. And we saw RPO. We saw just quick game. We saw option zone keeper. And it worked pretty consistently. I mean, it also helps. This is something we saw all season was people going, Well, you don't have to respect the Florida Gators quarterback run game. So you can really key in on just the running backs there, and Graham can't make the plays with his legs. Max Browne made the plays with his legs. And that was something where it helped open up Trevor Etienne. It helped open up Montreal Johnson. And so I just think that maybe play style wise, it just works better, especially with opening up the run game. I mean, Florida's running backs had to do so much of the work by themselves. Trevor Etienne had 82 rushing yards. 81 of them came after contact. Montreal Johnson had 85 rushing yards. 68 of them came after contact. It was a lot of just them needing to make plays. And Max Browne picked up almost 50 yards himself too. And I will say one of the big things with Max Browne, had the fumbled on the handoff exchange with Montreal Johnson. I'm not sure whose fault that was. Genuinely, Max Browne should have gotten the ball lower. Montreal also raised his arms really late, and it was his elbow that knocked the ball out on the way up. But Max, I mean, when Max Browne took off on one of his zone reads, he immediately just 2 hands on the ball and was just running like that the entire time because he was like, all right, can't screw it up again. So I think the offense opens up a bit. It's obviously going to be less efficient throwing the football, but we're going to see at least. I look at this as Max Browne. This is your opportunity to become a Florida Gators legend. If you can unseat Florida State in the last game of the season when they're undefeated and you get bowl eligibility, while also this is your audition to be QB1 next year. Graham Mertz might come back. DJ Lagway is going to be a true freshman. This is your time to show this coaching staff, hey, like just don't forget that I'm here and I'm willing to make some plays.
You brought up that he takes more risks down the field. 2 questions on that. You can approach this how you see fit. Sometimes quarterbacks are like, I don't want to get hit, and I throw it up. That's young quarterbacks in general. I would go 90% do that at some point in their career for a little bit. He's probably beyond that. He's been at Florida for more than a year. But was he throwing those in rhythm? I didn't watch any of that game. None of it. Was he throwing it in rhythm that way and he had 2 options and he's like, I'm going down the field? Or was it just under duress he threw it down the field more?
It was the throw to Khalil Jackson that was like deep down the left sideline. Looked like it was just smash, and he just made the read.
So he threw the corner route and he hit it. Okay.
Yeah. So he just made that read and he just threw it, and it was blanketed coverage. Receiver just went up and made a play. So it was one of those times where, it wasn't just an F it, someone's down there. He threw it to Khalil Jackson. He wasn't throwing it to one of the elite receivers on the team. He threw it to the guy who, I don't know what is Khalil Jackson's deal. He's just a circus catch receiver. It's wild. And I made the joke where during the game, I said, he'll drop the easy things, but if you 360 no scope, he'll catch it and come down with it. And that's exactly what he did. They threw the ball to Khalil Jackson for the lateral at the end of the game. He dropped it. It's just it was one of the, he dropped the curl where he was supposed to lateral. So it's just one of those situations. But yeah, Max, it looked like just smash, maybe fade smash, and he just threw it up to the corner there and worked out.
Well, that's an interesting deal because Florida State's secondary, especially early in the year, had some mishaps on, wait a minute, that was your guy, and the guy's running into the end zone. And they've gotten better. But they get down early. There was some really good play calling from the North Alabama. I mean, the big pun and all that. I knew they weren't going to sustain anything because they couldn't, do that against FSU's defense. I'm curious because you'd sent that chart out to everybody on Locked On about the blitzes and stuff, and I was looking at that a few minutes ago. Florida State blitzes about 30% of the time. But when you single in and you look at a team that has newbie at quarterback, I would imagine you're going to, for lack of a better team, see different and probably a little more exotic both directions, but especially for the kid for Florida because he's a redshirt freshman. Tate Rodemaker's been around a little bit, and we'll talk about him in a moment, but do you think he's going to be ready for drop the defensive end and here comes the SWAT? And is he that kind of guy, or is he going to be the deer in headlights in your opinion?
I don't know what he's going to be, but I do expect this to be a game where Florida's just I expect to see a lot of RPO, a lot of option. And if Max isn't prepared for dropping a defensive end, RPO is going to be a little bit of an issue then. Because, I mean, we saw the couple times they ran the RPO, it was glance. So it was receiver running a slot or receiver running a slant and looking there. You drop a defensive end into there, and we'll find out what kind
You
of
don't
quarterback Max
recognize
Browne's
it.
going to be. Yeah, we'll find out what kind of quarterback he's going to be if he's making that read and they're running that kind of RPO. But I do think that we're going to see a lot of option. I think that's going to be an approach that you have to take with Max Browne, and it's the good, like it's the better approach that you can give there. I truly don't know what they're going to give him as far as the green light pre-snap, just
That's
because
the question.
we know Graham Mertz has the green light to make any check that he needs to make. Graham Mertz has 3 years of starting experience prior to this year. So yeah,
Correct.
not too sure what we're going to see with Max Browne there, if it's going to be simplified, if we're going to see a lot of screen game. I'm genuinely not too sure. That's the fun part about this, though, is going, hey, what the hell is going to happen? Nobody knows what the plan is there. But I would expect Max to probably struggle if you get more exotic there, as most freshmen making their first career start would.
Well, here's the other part to that. He has nothing to lose. I've had this conversation for years with people. When you have a new starting quarterback that comes in, especially, they're not going to be favored. I think even though, Florida State lost Jordan Travis, and that's a travesty within itself, they're the better football team, so they're going to be favored. But you're playing with house money. Do you see him as a little bit of a riverboat gambler? I mean, throwing it one thing to Jackson or whatever and that's great. Is he that guy that's like, if I get a few picks, but I still want the highlight ESPN play? Because, I mean, he's taken off too. You got to give him credit. He's got some guts. So I hate using this term because everybody always goes back to it. But Brett Favre would run and do some crazy things. But I think he's still all-time leader or close to it in interceptions in the NFL. He threw some dumb passes too. I'm getting the vibe that that's what this guy is a little bit. Not that that's bad, especially being compared to Brett Favre. But what do you think about him as a playmaker? Is that just his design?
Yeah, I think we're going to see him be aggressive. I mean, just watching his high school tape, even dating back to when he was, I forgot the high school he was at specifically, but in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And he was it was a very vertical offense. And it seemed like he loved working in that. And I think he just had better athletes than the other guys, which is where we also get into an interesting conversation of that's going to work, because if you could just out athlete people and throw it up deep, yeah, your stats are going to look great. But he completed like 70% of his passes and like 11 yards per attempt. It was insane with how vertical they were, but that seems to be what he wants to do. He's got a big arm. He's mobile. I would expect him to be as aggressive as Billy Napier will let him be, because he also showed moments where 4th and 4, he threw the slant with zero hesitation on a line, and then it was great there. So it doesn't look like confidence is an issue with him at all. He ran for first downs, and he was like doing the little first down thing. Like he was looking like he was a confident quarterback. On a road game against the number 9 team in the country, he was doing the little first down point. So he's confidence isn't an issue, I think, with Max. And I think we saw him throw the ball like 10 times, maybe, and we saw him run it another 5. And he looked confident with everything he did. So whether or not he's going to work out, I don't know, but I fully expect him to be as aggressive as Billy Napier gives him the light to be.
I like it when guys go out there and represent themselves like that. So without even seeing any of the Missouri game, full disclosure on that, props. He went out, this is what I'm going to do. So that's kind of cool. That brings me to my thought on Rodemaker. He's similar, that he threw a couple of balls that were like, these are really small windows. He threw a 19-yard out, which you don't even see that stuff at the NFL level. And he put it low and on the – I was like, is this Dan Marino? This was kind of weird. That's not a normal backup. But he did it without hesitation too. So I'm going to go out on a limb and project for both of us. We're going to see at least one what was that play from both quarterbacks in this game, which is why you opened with this is going to be an ugly game. And also we're going to see, look at that. Nice seam ball. First down, 25-yard gain for the Gators or for the Seminoles. I think we'll see a little of both in this game. That leads me to the next thing. Florida's running game, as you noted a few minutes ago, it's doing good, but they did that despite, sounds like, pretty bad offensive line play. I mean, like 1 yard gain that wasn't after contact that's just absurd. I don't care what level. Pop Warner, NFL Super Bowl. That should never be the case. What are we doing? It's the Florida Gators.
Yeah.
Give me the definition of what the hell's going on with the Florida's offensive line.
Yeah, I think for a lot of the season, it's been that there's genuinely no continuity. I mean, you started the year with Jake Slaughter as your starting center because Kingsley Eguakun was hurt. A few weeks later, Kingsley comes back, doesn't finish the game. It's Jake Slaughter again. Then Jake Slaughter starts the next game, and then Kingsley starts the next game, gets hurt, doesn't finish that game. Jake Slaughter comes in. And we've seen that change at center alone a ton of times. Left tackle, right tackle. I mean, when you look at the Missouri game, Florida was down to offensive tackle 3 and offensive tackle 4 starting because Austin Barber missed the game completely. Damian George got hurt because he got rolled up on. And then you look at Cam Waits and making his first start at tackle. At right tackle, he switched to left tackle. And then Lindell Hudson was in at right tackle. There were a ton of injuries along this offensive line. There's been a ton of change, but I think a lot of it is, and people that have listened to my show know that I will always say, your offensive line is more about how you perform as a unit than individually. It's really hard to find a chemistry as a unit when you're changing your starting center every other week, especially when Jake Slaughter's been playing fine. Like I want to make that, like, he's been playing fine. It's just hard to find rhythm as a unit when you're constantly rotating guys in and out. And then tackle, now they weren't performing well to begin with. And then they got injured on top of that. So the guys who weren't performing well, their backups are now in. And so clearly the fact that they're not starting means that they're generally worse than that. So it's just been a mess on the offensive line. I'm fully expecting them to make a change on the coaching staff here because your offensive line has regressed. You have 2 offensive line coaches and your offensive line's regressed. So if I'm Billy, I'm making a change on the offensive line, and hopefully he recognizes that as well.
Ouch. What position would you say has ascended? I'm curious about what you're going to say on this for the Gators the most, say, in the last 4 weeks during, like we're playing SEC opponents here. Who have they played the best against, like a unit that's taken that step forward?
I think you got to look at Florida's tight ends. I just think that over the entire season, they've made strides. And I'm not going to pretend that I'm completely unbiased about it. I have Hayden Hansen, one of our starters on the show every Wednesday. But he's been lights out as a blocker. Arlis Boardingham, when he actually gets thrown the ball, has kind of erupted recently. You look at the Vanderbilt game, and that was kind of his coming out party. South Carolina, he made some nice plays. So Arlis Boardingham as a pass catcher, Hayden Hansen as a blocker. And in recent weeks as a pass catcher as well, he had a 25-yarder against LSU when they were backed up on their own 2. And then against Missouri, he had a 34-yarder that was just straight. Both of them were just straight catch and run. So they've opened up the offense a little bit. I think the tight ends have really stepped up. And I mean, statistically, Florida is one of the best 12 personnel teams in the country right now because of how their tight ends have stepped up.
Do you think they're better in the pass game or the run game?
I would say that Hayden's much better just in the blocking game in general. Arlis is better as a pass catcher, and then just the overall team is just, I couldn't tell you what they're better at. It's just so wildly inconsistent depending on the offensive line play. It's like Graham Mertz has been making plays when they're available, but even Missouri, before he got hurt, he was not playing well. He got hurt early in the game with his leg, and after that, he was just missing easy throws that he doesn't normally miss. And then he fractured his collarbone after that, and it was just not great. If you're a Florida Gators fan, it wasn't fun to watch that. I mean, it was fun to watch the play. It wasn't fun to the very next play, watch him hand the ball off, immediately turn to the sideline and go, ow, just pointing to his collarbone. So that wasn't fun. But this is, if there's one thing this team is consistent with, it's that they are wildly inconsistent. That is the only thing. That's it.
How far into the game was it that Graham got hurt?
Late third quarter, early fourth.
So Browne actually saw the eye of the tiger there, literally and figuratively, yes, pun intended. Playing at Mizzou, you're in a circumstance where, the game can go either way. That could have went south. So if FSU or their fans think they're just going to walk in and he's not going to do something, that's interesting, because I didn't know if he just played like a couple of possessions, but like the game was still possible.
Yeah, Graham got hurt in the third quarter with 3 minutes left while driving downfield, and they were down 2.
Okay, so it's clutch time, flat out.
And then Max Browne had about 5 plays, and then they had the fumbled exchange between him and Montreal Johnson. And then Missouri scored a touchdown the very next play, and Florida came out and Max Browne drove him downfield. Like, I'm not going to say that Max Browne's, QB1 forever for Florida, but
right.
He showed up when he needed to show up in a time where I'm sure a lot of Florida Gators fans saw Graham Mertz get hurt and were just like, well, that's the game. And Max drove them downfield. He gave them the lead. He drove them downfield and they took the lead, and then they lost on the field goal at the end. So yeah, Max showed up in the biggest possible way when the team really needed him. And I know that last drive, we could talk about how maybe Florida should have thrown the ball. Realistically, if Trevor Etienne doesn't run out of bounds on 3rd and 12, when Missouri only has one more timeout and about 1:15 left, you're looking at a win probably. You kick that field goal to take a lead. Missouri has no timeouts left. So when we look at this, we can say that, yeah, Billy Napier should have thrown the ball and all that. And everybody screws up every now and then. I'm not going to pretend Trevor Etienne sucks all of a sudden, but if you look at the game and you look at that game management at the end there, you stay in bounds, you probably win that game.
Etienne being who he is, a second-year player, who his brother is, that's bad play. That's bad play. There's just, and I'm a big fan. He's a very good runner. That's bad play. So if he did it on his own, yeah, it's not good. All right. Let's talk about the other side. What do you think Florida can do? Again, Brown's the quarterback. Where do you think Florida State is most susceptible with what Florida does, considering, as in your own words, wildly inconsistent, trying to, and I know I'm putting you on the spot for this, but FSU's front, especially if UF is having problems at tackle, it's not going to be friendly at all. Both edge guys are going to get paid. And Fisk is starting to come on. They've got some guys rotate. That's not going to be friendly. Is it going to have to be option to keep them balanced, to make them assigned? I would think so. Based on once you started talking to me about the tackles that Barber's at, because he's a pretty good football player when he's completely healthy, but I don't think he's a left tackle. I think he should play right tackle or right guard. Yep. That's what I think. But that's a story for another day.
Yeah, why Florida doesn't have another reason that Napier needs to look at that O-line stuff and figure that one out, because
Barber's a pretty good player. I saw him play in high school, but it's just interesting to me that you're looking at a situation where Florida should never be in a left tackle problem situation. It's Florida, but that's another story. Option game. Is there anything else, or this Travis makes 6 guys miss on this play, and then it'll be 2nd and 5? Because if they're in that kind of situation, they're not beating Florida State. Tate being the quarterback or not, they have to have something more than that. We both agree that they're going to run option. What else can they do to attack this FSU defense?
I think one thing that we're going to see is the RPO game a little bit, because if you take the approach of, hey, if Florida State's going to be really aggressive, if you have the slant, if you have the screen, whatever the route is on that play, take it. If you're Max, I think that we see Florida with Anthony Richardson. Billy Napier used to bring out a play that my listeners know I love, which is, and I'm sure it's split zone read. And I would fully expect them to bring that back now, especially you've got Hayden Hansen has been thriving in split zone situations, specifically just coming downhill across the field. So I'd expect him to see that. And then I think that we see a little bit of just like boot slide. And it's like, if you're in that PA slide and you make it look the same exact way as split zone read, and then you just dump it real quick.
That's an easy one. Sure.
Yeah. I'd see Florida taking that kind of approach of just, hey, if you're going to be really aggressive, we will run the option. And like, because either way, if Florida State doesn't blitz frequently, because they don't at this point, but again, they might with a freshman with a redshirt freshman making his first start. If they don't blitz frequently, their edges are probably still going to be just licking their lips, just ready to go into the backfield. And so I would expect option there, and feel free to pull it anytime that they kind of shoot into the backfield, and then try to take advantage underneath and pick up yards after the catch, which is what your offense does. But I would also expect a couple of times just send people deep, and if it's there, let Max throw it just to keep them honest. It doesn't have to work. Again, you just have to let them know that you're willing to do that with Max, and you're not just going to be this cookie cutter. Like, you're not going to be the Giants with Tommy DeVito starting. Like, you're going to actually try to play offense here. And so I think that's your approach of just, we think that they're going to be really aggressive, try to take advantage of it with just quick game and get by them. And that has to be right. That has to be the best approach that I think Florida can take if you want to upset Florida State here.
I'm curious about that. I wondered if you were going to say receivers a little bit ago because of Eugene Wilson. I know him, and he was dominant in 7-on-7 for Team Tampa, and he played at Gaither, a program I'm very familiar with. He, to me, is the X factor in the game. Because Pierce Hall's good too, but you and I have talked about this off the air. He can't be your number one if you're going to be an upper echelon SEC team. He's a good football player, and he'll probably make a roster, but he's not a burner dominant guy. Eugene Wilson, if you take a misstep in coverage, he gone. He can fly. Is he at that point now where he's a true number one in your opinion, or is Florida force feeding him some because, okay, we have to? Or is it a little both?
I think that he's got the skill set to be a legit number one, but his usage doesn't indicate that at all. He's still mostly a gadget, runs like most of his work
underneath.
Yeah. So but also that could just be because you have a bad offensive line right now, or it could just be because Graham Mertz is such a conservative thrower that you're just like, okay, well, we'll at least keep Eugene Wilson in the game plan by keeping him in the area Graham might actually throw to. So it could be that, but I've been sitting here for a month just asking Billy Napier to let Trey Wilson run actual routes as a wide receiver. And we saw that open up a little bit. We saw the Georgia game. His touchdown was a catch and run off a dig route, and he just outran everybody after that. And we saw the Arkansas game. He ran a wheel at a bunch and scored a touchdown there. And so we've seen things open up a bit for Trey Wilson. It's just a matter of, will you actually let him continue to do that? And I do think that with Max Browne, that's more likely, just because, like you mentioned, if you take one misstep in coverage, he's gone. Now, if you have Max Browne that's willing to make that throw or at least attempt it, I don't see why you wouldn't let him uncork it.
Well, I kind of think so too. Sustaining drives against Florida State with a banged up O-line doesn't seem like the greatest path. And they're also with a quarterback that likes to throw down the field and has some accuracy, apparently, or Jackson wouldn't have made that catch last week for one. You're going to have to take some shots. I like your point about the split zone and doing some different things. I'm going to guess that he needs 50 yards rushing, maybe even 80. Maybe he pops a 40-yarder, which could happen. Guy takes the wrong angle. He's a pretty good athlete. It's possible you could see that. For Florida State, I think their biggest key is just real simple. And I know this is a boring answer. If they're even or ahead in turnovers, they should win by double digits. They could even be -1, I think, as long as it's not a pick six or just like, they get the ball in the 3-yard line, Florida State. They should win because they got the better defense. I think that's a conservative answer here. So is there anything, before I get you out here, special teams or anything else that you think could give the Gators an edge?
Sure as hell not special teams.
I know. That's why I threw that out there.
But yeah, I will say there's one thing about special teams that I love, and that is that Trey Smack on kickoff just has such a big leg that I can't see a kick return touchdown against Florida because it just goes through the back of the end zone every time. So at least we haven't seen that. But I think that I feel like Austin Armstrong has to feel his butt getting a little bit hot right now with what's happened. 4th and 17, best receiver in the SEC, just wide open downfield. Makes no sense if you're Florida, but that's how you lost. Luther Burden there, wide open. It's just stuff like that can't happen. And it seems to happen consistently. Where congratulations, you didn't give up 700 yards. You held Cody Schrader to 148 when he had 100 in the first half, or almost 100 in the first half. But yeah, it's just got to figure something out on defense if you're the Florida Gators, and they haven't yet. I will say part of the game plan early on against Missouri, I liked. He was just aggressive as hell. He had one, and I told this story on the postcast. He had one play where he blitzed the slot and the boundary corner. And I asked someone that I know that helps put together the scheme, and I was like, "What do you call, like, what's the name of that? What do you call that?" And he said, "Crazy." That's the only thing I could. That's crazy to blitz both your slot and your boundary corner, and then drop both of your edges into coverage. All we call that is crazy. So he's clearly just throwing the kitchen sink at people right now. It's just.
Not great.
Can you put together just one more strong defensive performance if you're Florida? Because you had the Tennessee game, hell of a defensive performance. Can you put together one more? Like can we have 2 in a year, or is that just asking too much?
I'm going to let this show wrap up on that, because that's just awkward as all get out. And that makes me feel much more confident about Florida State coming out with a W. That's not great for the Florida Gators right there. I've never heard of that blitz call. Not seen.
I've never heard it. That's why I had to ask about it.
What is that?
I was like, what do you call that? And usually I will get a legitimate answer, and he just went crazy. Like, I don't know what else to say. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you, Brandon, for coming on. We'll probably do something later this week, I'm assuming, after we know a little more about the injury front, maybe something more regarding whatever it is that they call it with Florida's offensive line. Maybe they mix in some guys that can block a little bit for Travis Etienne, stuff like that. And hopefully this game will be still a great game, because it is a rivalry game, and it is one of the most important rivalry games, just flat out, no matter what team you root for in all of college football. So Brian Smith for Brandon Olsen, thank you to everybody. Have a great day.